everybody. Whoa, can you hear me? I am Cappy Pell, president of the Johann Fust Library Foundation, and on behalf of our board and our foundation staff, welcome to this special program where we will learn about what it takes as a writer to turn a final draft into a published book. I am especially pleased to welcome back to our garden and loggia Nan Doyal. Nan is uniquely qualified to introduce and lead our discussion with our panel today. An author herself, Nan was first here in November 2017 to discuss her award-winning book, Dig Where You Are: How One's Personal Effort Can Save a Life, Empower a Community, and Create Meaningful Change in the World. Nan is also the founder and executive director of Casper Press, an independent publisher of fiction and nonfiction books. Part of the mission of Casper Press is to bring books to readers that both enrich our understanding of the world around us and to give us insight into people who inspire and inform us. Nan is joined today by a couple of friends of the library and supporters and a new face, all of whom already inspire us, and today will help to enlighten us on the art and craft of publishing a book. Thank you, all four of you, for being with us today.
So let me just kick this off with some questions for all of you. I always love to do this to just get a sense of where your heads are as you come into this. How many of you have actually published a book or had a book published? Okay. And how many of you have started the process and maybe you're waiting or not sure what to do next? All right. Okay, a couple of you. How many of you have thought about it? Well, good. Great. Okay, how many of you are in the wrong session?
Water a little bit.
Just kidding. Okay. So when we were talking about this panel, we thought it would be very interesting to talk about what it takes to publish a book. I mean, have you ever thought about the books that you hold in your hands and how it goes from the final draft that an author has to this, the wonderful piece that you have? And that's interesting. I think even for a lot of published authors, they're not exactly sure what happened to get their book from manuscript to final product. But we also thought that it would be really helpful for you all to understand what's changing in the publishing world now and how accessible it is really to any one of us that wants to publish our work. And so we hope that for some of you who are thinking about it, or maybe have an idea of a book in your head or a memoir or a family history or a book on a favorite time of history, that you won't hesitate to write it and see it through because you're afraid that you can't publish it. So hopefully you'll walk away with some learning and some insight on that. And for those of you who are experienced authors with lots of books published, hopefully you'll learn something too that you didn't know before. So the world of publishing has changed dramatically in the last, I'd say, 10 years, 7 years, 5 years. And because of technology, now we're able to do so many things we weren't able to do before. We're able to print books ourselves, and we're able to market those, and we're able to distribute them all over the world. So this is obviously, as you can imagine, you called it, Rosemary here, the democratization of publishing. It's really made it possible for every single one of us to actually publish a book if we wanted to. Of course, who knows if people will read it, but you can publish it. So we thought one of the things that might be interesting to start with would be to unpack the publishing process. So let's talk about what's involved in it, what historically has been involved with publishing a book, and currently still is, by the large publishing houses out there, trade publishers like Penguin, Simon & Schuster, that you're familiar with, the university presses, which many of you are also familiar with. And what we'll do is take a look at what does publishing look like historically and what's it starting to look like now. and where are perhaps some of the choices and opportunities for you. So to help us do this, we have 3 guests. Our first guest is first time on the island. Yes. Rosemary Ahern has joined us for this discussion. Rosemary is a publishing executive, is an editor. She spent a long time she had a good part of her career acquiring and editing books for Penguin, Simon & Schuster, and other press before she left and became an independent editor working with authors. She is I'm going to say author, but she's actually the editor and compiler of the book, The Art of the Epigraph, How Great Books Begin. And for those of you who don't know what an epigraph is, it's that little quote that comes sometimes at the beginning of a book. It's actually my favorite thing to do when writing a book or publishing a book, because I publish a few, is to find great quotes that kind of illuminate what's to come in the book. So this is a wonderful book to read through and get a copy of it. It's filled with brilliant quotes, very inspiring. Welcome, Rosemary.
Thank you very much.
Candy Hooper, who some of you might know. Author, yeah. Author of 2 books, nonfiction, Lincoln's General's Wives, which was published by Kent State University Press, and Delivered Under Fire, her most recent book, which I think you're all familiar with, which was published by Potomac Books, University of Nebraska Press. I think I said it right. Candy will correct me if I didn't. And she's working on her 3rd book right now. David Sparks, you know David? Welcome back, David. Author of 4 books of fiction, Bearing Pinkie Pie, What Carlos Knew, Built to Fail, and his most recent book, Eulogy, which I've said to a couple of you, I'm reading this now. I'm almost done, and I can't wait till the end of the day to get home and find out what happens next. They're for sale outside. David David's going to have some very interesting stories to tell us. David is on the bleeding edge of publishing right now. David has self-published his 4 books and actually has renamed. I think you've named now your publishing entity as David Sparks Books is what I saw. So he's going to have some fun stories to tell us about publishing. So let's get talking about this. And I'm going to ask Candy first, and Rosemary too, but let's start with Candy because I think Candy can give us, I know she can because we've had this conversation, a good sense of what it's like to publish a book in the traditional way. So Candy's publisher was a university press. And Candy, when you and I talk about this, I think a good place to start is to say you had a manuscript and you were ready to get it published. And I can skip a little bit the part about Rosemary. One of the things that I should mention is Rosemary is Candy's editor. So get the 2 of them together. And when the 2 of you had a manuscript that you were happy with, then what happens with a book? How does it start?
Well, if I might just take a second to correct what Nan said about the changes in publishing. She talked about the changes in publishing in the last 10 years. But we sit here in the Johann Fust Library. And Johann Fust, I like to think of as the original Shark Tank. He was the guy who financed Gutenberg in his first printing press. So we are sitting here talking about the changes in printing and publishing books that have taken place over 600 years. And we're probably the only place that can do that. So just take a moment to think how much this library has contributed to the history of publishing. But I'll go back now to the question, to answer the question. So I started out, I became a writer while I was on this island. This island, as I've mentioned before, is particularly suited to writers. Not only is it a great atmosphere for writing, but you have this lovely library, and they can help you get any kind of information or books through interlibrary loans. So I wrote this manuscript. It was 650 pages, double-spaced pages of books. And when we went to try to get a publisher. They all said it was too long, but we finally did get Kent State University Press, an acquiring editor there, who was very interested in the Civil War and very interested in women's stories of the Civil War. But she said, you've got to cut at least 200 pages. And I knew at that point that I couldn't do that. It's what they call killing your darlings. You can't just kill off all of these pages. And so I asked my agent for help, and she was the one that recommended Rosemary to me. And we have had just this most marvelous, exhilarating, for me at least, relationship since then. But then once that manuscript was finished at the university press level, it has to go through readers. And so there are two readers, and they choose them based on the fact that they are supposed to know something about your subject and to be sort of vetting you. That is the role of the university presses, is to produce something that is both good to read but also accurate. And there's always this joke about reader number 2, and I really had that experience. Reader number 1 was great. They're anonymous, unless they say that, but they're anonymous, and went through and made some very helpful comments. Reader number 2 just basically asked strange questions, which were all answered in the manuscript, and clearly did not finish reading the manuscript at all. There were no marks after half of it, but she kept complaining that I didn't do things that were all done in the conclusion. So, but be that as it may, Kent State University Press still decided to take it on. And at that point, once you've signed the contract with a press, you lose control of your manuscript. You lose control of your book. And that's something that you have to know when you publish the traditional way. You don't get the final say on what the title is. You don't get the final say on what the cover looks like. You don't get the final say on what's on the inside or how many illustrations or where they appear. And so that is a downside of traditional publishing. But at the same time, they can produce a beautiful product, as both of my books were just lovely. I was able to save both titles, although there were interventions attempted to change the titles, and both covers were really done beautifully. And then you get this beautiful book. They send you a box of, well, usually your contract says you get 10 books, but I always angled to get 20 free books. You get those books, and then basically, if you're a new author, and especially with the university press, you're on your own. You've got to go sell it. And so that's why Boca Grande became so important to me. Through Barbara Edgerton, I got to have my first talk about my book at the community center, and sold more books than I sold any other time on the planet. But you never stop marketing your own book. Now, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. Can I ask you another one too, which
Sure.
is, so how long did it take, and maybe Rosemary, you can add to this too, how long does it take from the moment well, I have two questions, but one is, how long does it take typically from the moment you sign that contract, or even from the moment you hand the manuscript over, so it has to go through the readers, to the time you held the book in your hand?
Okay. So the first book I did sell from a full manuscript because I was a first-time writer. And from the time that Kent State University agreed to publish the book, and then Rosemary, we spent probably 6-8 months to revising that. And then it was probably 18 months to get the final book published.
Yeah, okay.
I think in traditional mainstream publisher, it's a little shorter. It's typically a year, but things can happen in that time. You know, if you're publishing in Random House, there are all these different companies there. There might be a book very similar to your book that's publishing at the same time, and they don't find out till kind of late, so your book gets pushed 6 months.
Yeah.
So that type of thing can happen. But the traditional wisdom is it takes a year from the time a final manuscript is delivered and accepted to both physically produce the book and to market it so that it will do well.
Yeah. Interesting. So one thing I was going to ask both of you, because you've had experience in the traditional field, is if someone has a manuscript and they want to have Penguin print publish it for them. Say, I've got this manuscript, I think it's great, and how do I get people to pay attention to my manuscript? How do I get it accepted? Do I call? Do I find a list? Do I look online and find a name? Do I what's the right way to approach
Most
them?
books are sold to Penguin and other like the big mainstream publishers through a literary agent. So the first thing you're going to do is try and find a literary agent. And there are ways that you can educate yourself about the entire industry, like coming to events like this. There are some newsletters. I mean, you can even look in books you love. Typically, authors acknowledge their agent. So you can make a little list of agent names you see. You can look them up online. So you begin sending out query letters. Agents have different, requirements, but generally you're writing a terrific query letter and you're sending a small amount of your work and hoping for the best. And these days, often you'll get silence, and silence usually means just move on.
Right. Yeah. Very typical. And you can also spend a couple years doing that.
Yes.
Case in point, I've done it.
When I started freelancing in about 2008, sort of typically what I saw is when I finished working with a writer who may not have had any connections to publishing or other authors, but the book was really great, it could take them about 2 years to get an agent and take that agent possibly another 2 or 3 years to sell the book. So you're kind of thinking 5 years. I kind of think that time period has grown since then. I worked on a wonderful book that I thought would sell in a minute, and 10 years later, I learned that it had been sold to a great publisher. It's going to be terrific, but it took that author 10 years of persistence.
Yeah.
I have a question for Candy. When you signed your contract with your publisher and you lost control, did they pay you?
Oh yeah, yes. No.
Okay, then.
The contract includes payment. But let me just mention that with university presses, you don't need an agent. They are a type of press that you can approach on your own. Of course, you have to be in their wheelhouse. You have to look at these different university presses and see what kinds of books they publish. But they will on their website, they'll not only tell you the kinds of books they publish, they show them to you, but they'll list the editors and what kinds of books they are responsible for. And so you go down the list and find an editor who's in charge of what your book is about, and you contact them. And that's what happened the second time, is that I went through an imprint of Nebraska Press called Potomac, and there was this one editor in Potomac Books that was the Civil War guy, and so that's where the manuscript went.
Yep.
But the agent route is tough, but can be very, very rewarding. The university press is, you can at least try to climb that mountain on your own.
Yep. Okay, so let's switch gears here for a second. How long did it take you from contract to production? I'm just kidding. So, as a comparison, you have a very different model, David, in how you brought your book to market. And tell us a little bit about why you did it the way you did it, and how long it took you.
I cringed a little bit to be described as being on the cutting edge.
Leading edge, actually.
I cringed a little bit to be described as being on the cutting edge. Up till about 8 years ago, I was a Republican, and we don't like to be on the cutting edge of anything. And if I'm on the cutting edge, given my production here, it's a dull knife. I'm an example of a, and you could see it as a success in some way, but a failure in terms of the traditional publishing model. I started to write in 2012, 2013, wrote a fairly lengthy novel, a political suspense novel set in Massachusetts, and set about to do what you are is recommended to do, and that's to send your query letters to, and I did it at the same time, to potential agents and potential publishers. And I found that relatively easy. They're all in pretty obtainable databases through various publications, all available pretty much on the internet. Um, and I sent 150 to agents, 150 to publishers. Got very little response. Um, it was sort of word of mouth. At that point, I was 62 or something like that, and said that neither agents nor publishers were looking for 62-year-old white straight guys. Um, who had a kind of a rather mundane subject matter. I mean, a political novel set in Massachusetts. So at that point, I pivoted and went the Amazon route. And to answer your question, it can happen very quickly. The I'm going to skip over a lot of stuff here today, but a couple of references you might want to remember. First of all you need to do is start to Google any of these questions on the internet, and all of this new process is on the internet. And just like the way I fix anything in my house these days, it's all on YouTube. Turn this screw, turn that screw. There's a guy named Dale Roberts who has a business on YouTube telling you how to publish in non-traditional ways. There are various websites that all sorts of consultants are listed on, from book formatters to editors, and to even Audible, the Audible publishing service has a remarkably easy way of interacting with them, where there are a lot of unemployed actors out there, potential readers, and they will give you, just like editors will, they will give you. I'm sorry to say that, they'll give you a chapter for free, and you can see how they edit or you can see how they read. But the answer is very quickly. I mean, if you have a manuscript, Amazon says that it vets their work. If they do, they read awfully quickly. Because I think that they open up, and if it doesn't have a centerfold, they're okay with it. The Within days, they say, okay, go. And my editor at the time, in my first couple of books, I didn't realize at the time, but he was an experienced book formatter in that he knew how to deal with Amazon in terms of filling out their forms and sizing the cover and turning in the manuscript in a certain format and answering various questions. Um, and within a week, 2 weeks, you're ready to go. Um, I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to ever say this, but that's the good news. The bad news is, and I'm happy to hear that once you get published at University Press, it's your job to sell your books. Well, same thing with Amazon. I mean, it's an interesting point we're at, which Nan described. We've reached a point where you can do it yourself and you're in control of various elements of this process, as opposed to giving it over to this publishing industry in New York City, which I wish would adopt me. But um, but you reach the end of this and you've got a great looking book that people enjoy. And this is the cover, by the way, is painted by Brendan Kudal, who's a local artist. Um, people enjoy, but I don't know how to sell it. I mean, as it turns out, I had in my mind um, the stroke of lightning theory on the first one, and that was that a agent, a publisher, would find out about it and say, "Oh, that doesn't deserve to be on Amazon. Pull back that book. We'll publish it for you." And, that call never came. So the second, what was my second theory on the first book on the lightning strikes? That some rich person down here would know would know a publisher. You know, I know a lot of rich people. I mean, and people in politics. I actually know people who've written books, who've been paid to write political books, and they are generally unwilling to help you, or or their publisher, or their agent in Washington, who's a lawyer, doesn't do regular books, and so I mean, fiction. Let me just say quickly, the second book was written with teenage characters, so that gave me a whole new list of agents and publishers to drill dry holes on. I got no response from anybody. I did get one day I actually got a letter from an agency in San Francisco. The second book included a lot of Calusa Indian lore, which I spent a lot of time researching. Um, and they criticized me for being a white guy and appropriating the Calusa tradition, So, but at least they wrote back, Um, so finally, I'm at a point where, um, two teenage books in the middle now, and then this one, another political book. This one, I have to say, I've gotten a lot more compliments on. So I think, in fact, I know it's better. It's written better. It's an easier book to read. The narrative is pretty good, so I know it's a good book. So the challenge for me right now is that at age 62 or 63 or 4, I stopped selling. I mean, lots of us have jobs that have an element of going hand in hand to people and selling. And all of a sudden, I became creative. I was an author. Well, it's a huge disappointment to get to the end of this process, and you've got 300 books in your living room, or all these books available on Amazon, and it's your job to sell them. And you're going, well, and then you can. In the first 3 books, I was able to get away with. Now they're not very good, but this one I know is good. So I'm trying to figure out. I mean, we've evolved to a point where my theory on this one, my lightning strikes theory, was Stephen King. No, I had 2. Yeah, Stephen King was number 1. Twitter has evolved to the point, and the election helped evolve this so that there are individuals out there who have a huge number of followers who pay very close attention to him, and Stephen King is one of them. And his followers are readers, and he and I have a couple of connections, and so I exercised Project Stephen King. I wrote him a nice letter. I took one of the books to a meeting that he and I both go to, um, and no response. Um, so Stephen King, and it turns out I'm not the only person who's asked him for this. It also turns out that his wife and his daughter both write, and doesn't want to dilute the brand. So my second, I'll be quick here. My second, and not this didn't work very well, but it also includes social media and Twitter. I developed a lot of I cultivated 5 or 6 Twitter people during the election season, and who had big followings. And so I researched all of them, who they were, and everything. And I packed up 3 of my a book for each person, put in an envelope, wrote a nice letter to each one of them, said, I understand this is weird. You and I know each other on Twitter. We both hate Trump. And won't you please say something nice about it to all your followers on Twitter? Well, that didn't work either. So anyway, I'm down. You're currently my current group. So The books are for sale out here.
I
So
have some ideas.
that's it.
I have some ideas for you. So, thank you, David. I told you it would be leading edge. So I'm going to step out of my moderator role for 1 second and just fill in the blank between these two ends of the spectrum. So traditional publishing and publish yourself. And I just quickly tell you about Casper Press, so you have some idea of that there's also another model for publishing. So when I went to publish my book, I sent my book out to agents and I sent it out to university presses, and I got a lot of feedback. Really interesting. We'd like you to write your own story, not those other people's story. And I was like, really? I didn't want to do any of that. This took 2 years of basically writing letters and getting no's back, or yes, we like it, but we want you to change it. So I decided to go and find an editor. I really rethought the book. I went and found an editor. I wish it had been Rosemary, but it was somebody else. And rewrote the book, and then decided that it was going to take way too long to bring this book to market if I had to go through that process all over again. So I had run businesses before, and I thought publishing is a business, right? I mean, obviously, you bring a product, you make a product, and you bring it to the market. So began to study the publishing industry, and at the time, in 2012, there's a company, some of you may have published with them, called She Writes Press, which is what they call a hybrid press. Yes, and really kind of broke ground with it. Was a very reputable, and still is. It's a very interesting company, but I like that model. So the way the model works is you act like a traditional publisher. You have editors in your network that aren't on staff, but you know who they are. And so I went out and found editors. You have book designers, book layout people who are available to do project work for you. And you register the book with Library of Congress, you have a copyright page, you do everything that a publisher does, you get reviews, you get blurbs, and everything. So basically kind of dissected that and created Casper Press, which is a publishing company. And like Mark Twain, who created his publishing company, it published my book. But it was great because then it created this template for publishing other people's book. And the way the model works, so if you go out there are a number of hybrid presses out there. Some are more reputable than others, so you want to shop carefully, is you as the author pay the cost of getting the book to market, which really is $5,000 to $7,000. Now, a lot of people will charge you more than that because they can. But it doesn't cost a lot if you think about hiring an editor, hiring a designer, and a hybrid press. What they do is they share the cost of bringing a book to market with the author. So no advances, you pay them, but you get this book, and then the book is then printed, and there's a whole cost structure to that, which I can talk to you about at some point, not today. So there's different ways of doing it. So that's kind of the in-between model. It's a press, it's an independent press, but it doesn't function the way the traditional presses do with advances. And basically, they take your book and you never see it again till it's done. With a hybrid press, you can have a little bit more interaction with the publisher, not always. And then there's that do it all yourself. So as you can kind of see, there's really a full spectrum out there on the market right now. So yeah. Does the hybrid press offer any marketing? It can. So some of them do, some of them don't. So my press, I ask the author that. So there's basic marketing I would do, but I also will say, I'll also say, do you want a publicist? So so those are it's like a Chinese menu. You can add on, but it does involve a marketing strategy. So that's one thing I want to come back to with everybody. But before I do, one thing I wanted to talk about, because every manuscript has to go through this, and it's really important that if you're writing something now, and now I'm back being a moderator. If you're writing, if you have a manuscript that you're working with right now, no matter which route you take to publish it, whether you go the traditional way or self-publish or hybrid, I would say the most, and this is my personal feeling, I'll be interested to see what the rest of you think. I know what you're going to say. I think the most important part of this process is the editing. And we talked about there are different kinds of editors in the process, from getting a book from rough draft to final manuscript to publication. And I'm going to ask Rosemary to talk a little bit about this. because she's really the most qualified to talk about it. And she might agree with me or not agree with me, but I think it takes the longest part of the production process, but it's also, I think, one of the most important. And even before it goes to the publisher, we've talked about how you and Candy work together. And I'm gonna throw a whole bunch of stuff at you, and you just pick and choose what you want to talk about. But this concept of where do you find your reader, where's your customer, how do you market to them? A lot of deciding, I think you've said this, a lot of deciding, or maybe you will say this, who your customer is comes in the editing. You discover that to some degree in the editing process as well, right? So anyways, take it away and tell us about editing.
I think so. I mean, as an editor, the first time you're reading something, I'm always really thinking about what is the author's intention here? What have they come to say? What's important to them? And then I step back a little with my knowledge of sort of the marketplace, the genre that they might be writing into. What are people wanting right now? So some people who come to me, they want both the help just on developing their story, etc., but they want a little perspective on, is my story marketable right now? So it requires me to be a little bit up on what books are successful right now. And I think it's great if authors, read around in the genre that they're hoping to publish in and just be familiar with what books are doing well, be conversant with it, because people you will be talking to along the way, whether you're trying to find an agent or you're trying to talk to even your friends about what your book is about, you can compare it to something that they know and that they might have loved. So that's important. Yeah. But it's different. That's why I love my work, because it's different every time. Candy and I currently are working what we might call developmentally, which is she is in the process of writing the book and she's sharing parts of the book with me as she goes along. We started out by working on a book proposal together. So that is a totally different animal, and some authors find doing a book proposal even harder than writing the actual book because it's very marketing focused. Have I gone off track? Or?
No. But the other thing I was going to ask you too is, and I learned this through publishing books, is how many darn editors there are in the process. I mean, there's
That's
you,
a good question.
and then there's like, who are copy editors, line editors?
That's a very good question.
Who are all these people?
Yes. So someone like myself, you might find someone like me calling themselves an independent editor, a freelance editor, a structural developmental editor. Those two terms are sort of signaling like I will work with you earlier in the process and help you get your book into shape. So say, I work with a writer, we both have a manuscript that we think is terrific, it's ready to go, the best thing happens, they find an agent, it's great, it sells right away. The person that is buying the book from the agent is an acquiring editor. And what writers should understand is you may think you have finished editing your book when you submit it to your agent. They may have you do a little more work. And then you'll get to the acquiring editor, and they may want you to do more work. So you kind of have to be prepared to be open to other perspectives at several points along the way. So you work with your acquiring editor. Hopefully they have great ideas for you that help you open up new possibilities with the work, and you're done. So the acquiring editor then turns the book over to a production editor. And the acquiring editor's focus changes from helping you produce the best book possible to helping that book sell as many copies as possible. So they go off and they get involved in the marketing process, and they're interacting with the sales department, the marketing department, the publicity department. The production editor is the person that's responsible from turning that manuscript into the physical book you hold in your hand. And they begin by sending it to a copy editor, which is a very special skill. And good copy editors are, worth their weight in gold. So what they're doing, yes, they're working on like grammar and typos, and they're finding small inconsistencies. They're they may do some sort of light fact checking. Fact checking is always the author's responsibility, but a good copy editor will tell you your character is driving a car that wasn't produced until 10 years after your story is set. So the copy editor does their work, and then the acquiring editor hopefully will be running their eye, spending half an hour looking at it so they can kind of, tip the author off. This copy editor was very intense. You don't have to take it all so seriously, or this is a great job. So the writers do get a chance to review their copy edited manuscript, and that is the last point to make changes. Honestly, publishers don't ever want you to be making changes, but that's the absolute last point. So author reviews the work, it goes back to the production editor, and then it will go to the proofreader, who is, the book is set into type, and the proofreader is checking it very carefully. It goes to the author at the same time. So the author is looking at it cold, unaware of what the proofreader is doing, but it feels good to be able to check your own work and make sure that there aren't typos. And the production editor coordinates between those two versions to produce the actual book.
That's really helpful, because I would say if you're not going that route and you decide to go hybrid, self-publish, or run it off at the local copy shop, depending on how many copies you want to sell, going through those editing phases, I think, is critical. And I can say that because if you get to the end, one of the things I can guarantee is when you get to the end, you'll always find typos.
Yes.
So having more eyes on your manuscript in after you think it's done I think it's the number one thing that you just, and even after all those eyeballs have looked at it, how many of you have read books that have come from great publishers and you find a typo? So
I don't want to stand out as the do-it-yourself person here, but early on in the process, when you're dealing with the conceptual editor and all the rest, you should not ignore your family and friends, and many of whom are quite experienced readers. There's a group of about 15 people I know here on the island who are very experienced, very critical readers who can talk to you about characters and who can talk to you about story arc and stuff like that, so that the broader, you're not going to ask them to do copy editing, but I have, including my daughter, a group of people who have read early manuscripts that I've written and are quite helpful and quite critical, when they need to be.
Yep. So the one other thing I would mention too, I think that's really important is, and I think editing, when you're thinking about your manuscript, all of you who are thinking about your manuscript and getting it published, I can't stress enough how important the editing process is. And you might want to find someone like Rosemary. There are many people out there like that. We talked a little bit about how do you find that right editor, because that's actually very interesting in the process too, is people who you trust, who you want to work with. Because one thing that can happen, I think, is you can get a lot of feedback on your manuscript, and some of it makes you unsure about what you've written. It may not be helpful feedback, but it's feedback, so you wonder, should I incorporate it or not? And you made, in our earlier conversations, you made a really good point about finding an editor, finding someone to work with you, either a reader early in the process or an editor at some point that is right for you, that is going to bring the best out in you. And I mean, Candy, I think has said this many times, how lucky she is to have met you. And obviously you two have a great relationship. But what are the things that someone might look for, a writer, as they're getting their manuscript ready? What kinds of things should they think about as they interview editors or look for editors, do you think?
I mean, I think David, even mentioned, some of these places, and this is the same too, if you just, maybe a writer and they say, oh, I've worked with this freelance person, he's great. You can ask them to look at a small amount of your work and talk to you about it. That's what I do generally. At this point, I've been doing this a long time and I have a lot of people I work with, so I'm generally not working with new people. But when I was, I would ask to see 50 pages and I would read them and have a chat with the writer just to let them know what my impressions were, what I was seeing, what seemed really great, what seemed like it might need a little work. So they hear from me, get a sense of my sensibility and my ideas, and so they can think about whether they think I'm a good fit. And I would encourage people, if you're going through the process, and it doesn't feel right, or something they say, kind of just stop it and tell the person, like, no, that was not my intention with this particular storyline or whatever.
It's a little like a cookbook. The the editors that I interviewed were available at different levels of engagement with you. I mean, they said, "Do you want me to rewrite that paragraph? Do you want me to uh, suggest? Do you want me to verbally suggest something? Do you want me to give you just a broad comment?" I mean, and in that, it's a little like a human version of AI. I mean, it's you need to, it turned out that I didn't want the editor to
Right.
give me a new paragraph, but that was a conundrum for me for a while.
Yeah, I don't I've always I didn't feel my role was to rewrite people's work, and if something came to me that really did need a lot of line by line work, I would typically like encourage the writer to, spend a little bit more time with it, or you try and be tactful, like read other writers who think. I didn't really see that as my particular role.
So I'm just going to make one comment, and then we want to hear questions from you. Thank you both, or all three of you. The one thing we didn't get to was talking about marketing to any great extent, and we can have a whole other session on that at some point. But the one piece of advice I guess I would give from my own experience publishing and selling books is, at some point in the process when you produce that beautiful book, you need to stop thinking of it as your baby, right, and start thinking of it as a product. Right. And so in part of doing that is to figure out, and I think you do this subconsciously as you write too, because I know I've spoken to both of our writers here and they both thought this way, is who's my reader and where am I going to find them? And what need am I filling for them with writing this book? And so that's very important. It's a tough thing for most of us authors to do, is to shift and think about our book as a product. But once you start thinking about that and you start thinking about where you're going to find them, whether it's in Civil War museums or it's in, well, I've got all sorts of ideas for you. Then marketing possibilities start to open up and how you access them. The other thing we didn't talk about, which we can again offline, is how these books actually get printed, because that has changed now too. So you can print on Amazon, and Amazon will distribute those books anywhere in the world. You can print to offset inventory, which is the way most of the publishers do for their first few rounds of books. So they print those beautiful books and they go sit in a warehouse. And you can also print through Ingram, which is the largest world, and actually I think now the only worldwide distributor of books to independent bookstores and large bookstores, and also online. And they were the big distributor, the big gorilla. They now got into the printing business. So you can print your book through Ingram and it can be sold in Australia, which is unheard of 7 years ago. You had to get international rights. You had to find who you're going to have, how you're going to ship your books over there. So we haven't even covered that yet, but the possibilities are growing, and it just really offers all kinds of opportunities for you to create a book and to sell it. And the number one thing is to think, I always ask people, who are you writing this book for? Where are you going to find them? And how many books do you want to sell? And those are really important questions to ask. If you only want to sell 5 books, go to the copy shop. But if you think you can sell 50 books, you should be looking at this. If you want to sell 100,000 books, well, start knocking on some agents' doors, right? But anyways, lots of stuff here just to sort of begin the discussion. But if anybody has any questions.
Does anybody have a question?
Here you go.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, guys. Very helpful and informative, I think. I'm feeling very confused, though. Okay, so I have a question for David. I have questions for all of you, but so you said when you were done, when you got your book, that you got a list of, well, maybe it wasn't when you were done, but that you had a list of agents and publishers.
Right.
did you get that from Amazon somehow through the Amazon
No,
website or?
that was all. You can learn how to do it on the internet. All you do is just sort of type in, ask those questions. This
Okay.
was 10, 12 years ago, so it's even further advanced today. But there's a publication called
Publishers Marketplace, yeah.
Publishers Marketplace,
Big phone book like.
Okay.
but it's also online, and you subscribe you for 1 month if you at the very least, and you have access to their database, and you can do all sorts of key searches. With my first book had a main character who was early in alcohol recovery, and I wrote in my query, it would be helpful if you have some experience in alcohol recovery. So I got 150 letters from people in AA. So not 100, but I did, of the 10 people I originally, any one of whom would have been great. I mean, they all were recovering alcoholics. So that's that one, but also the publishers are also in the same database. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The Publishers Marketplace, I think it's $25 a month.
Right.
And yeah, it's a good advice. Sign up for a few. And there's, even if you kind of go deep into it, you can, like, if there's a book you love, you can type in the author's name and you can find out who the agent of that book was. So that could be a source of, collecting agents' names. And, the agents typically have websites that you can go and read more about what they represent.
Okay.
But
Right.
I would also tell you that's 12 years ago. That if I were doing it today, I would seriously look into the hybrid model and see what's out there at this point. I mean, to me, where the marketplace has evolved is, to me, there's an enormous. If we've made it so easy for people to publish on Amazon and I guess Ingram, that I think there's a big market out there for someone to come along and grab the people that are being published there and saying, okay, we'll do your traditional publishing, because honestly, I mean, you spend all this time writing a book, you're just not going to want to get on the road and go to book. It's okay if somebody arranged it for you, but your mind isn't into that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe that's wrong.
So just and then Candy. So your agent didn't play any role in your relationship with the University of Nebraska Press?
No, actually, my agent got my first book, and then the second time, I suggested Potomac Press, and so she took it there. But technically, I didn't have to have her do that. But I felt that Potomac Press was the right place for that book because it had for a long time been an independent, standalone military history publisher.
Thank you. I have one question. What about I know it's not pretty to look at, but what about the e-book marketplace? What about e-books?
Amazon is Kindle, and when you publish on Amazon, you automatically publish on. If you check box, you automatically publish on Kindle. So that's taken care of. I have had some conversations with some professionals here in the last couple of months about, now that we've gotten into these different, that it's so easy to move this book around, like, except into people's hands. And the way people are consuming books, I said to the professional here on my right, would it be worth my while to do an audible book? Because there are some people who are just audible books. And also, as a big consumer of audible books, there's a whole bunch of them that are free from people like me. So I am going to go do that now on the thought that might be a lightning strike.
And with Ingram, which I recommended to David as well, he can take his book from Amazon if he owns the ISBN number. So that's a whole other thing we can talk about offline. And he can take it to Ingram. It's called Lightning Source is the printer. Ingram Spark is for small presses, and you can get your book published. And so any bookstore in the country can order that book and get it from Ingram. But also you can do an ebook through them. So if you've got readers who want to read on Nook, have a Nook. If people who don't have Kindle, but they have other e-readers, with Amazon, it's only Kindle. So you may want to, if you're publishing or you're using a hybrid publisher, and I don't know what they're doing with the university presses, but you want to have that ebook in formats that can be read on every reader. So you make that decision. And Ingram is compatible with every other reader. Kindle is compatible with, Amazon is compatible with Kindle. They own those markets. They lock up that market. So
The university
the way it's going right now, I'd be willing to come over and read it to you.
what did the university presses do?
My question is
the
a little bit
university
more
press-
financial probably than anything. I published 2 children's books, so my market's a little different. But I had an independent publisher publish them for me, and I was the marketer. So I felt like I was hauling my books everywhere, and people would say, "Oh, everybody that's a grandmother will want those books." Well, yes, that's true, but thousands and thousands know.
Yeah.
So my publisher put them on Amazon and Barnes and Noble online. They were not available in store because they weren't in the National Publishing Catalog or something. And that was a little concerning to me.
Yeah.
And so Amazon put it on for the price. The original price was $17.99. And then 2 weeks later, I see it on there as a used book for $12.99.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, so what's happening to all this? And you don't, I haven't really, received much back from the online publishing like I have the ones I've sold myself.
Yes.
So
yeah.
My question is, have you experienced that same thing, David? And also, is Ingram Printing, can they take my ISBN numbers and publish that in that?
So what I recommend with all of you, I mean, if you're publishing with, I don't know who owns the ISBN, it's probably your publisher, whoever publishes the book. So if you're self-publishing with Amazon, I recommend you get your own ISBN number on your book, and then you can post it on Amazon. You can have Amazon print it and you can have Ingram print it. But what Amazon will do is when you print a book with them, they'll give you an ISBN number, but they own the ISBN number. So if you want to print with Ingram as well, I recommend everybody do it on both, by the way. If you want to do it with Ingram as well, you're going to have to go get a different ISBN number, which is a little kind of confusing because a book has an ISBN number. Now it's got 2 ISBN numbers. So you're better to buy, it's through Bowker. You can actually buy your own ISBN number and you tell Amazon, this is the ISBN number for my book here with you, and it's going to be the same one with Ingram. So yeah. I don't know. You'd have to see what your arrangement is with your publisher. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so anyways, in answer to your question about sales, so because I'm the publisher, I get to see everything. And what's really interesting to me, and I think Candy will corroborate this as well, is where most book sales happen is in person. It's when you show up and talk about your book. And so, it just absolutely swamps everything else. The other thing that's been really interesting is, so the first book that I published, and then I've published a couple of other people's books, is it's very interesting if it can get into a curriculum or can get into something that's an annuity. And you want to try to do that with your book somehow, whether it's an English class or a history class, because every year I see these orders go in every September, so I can see those. What's been really interesting is how poor the ebook sales are. A lot lower than you would expect, than what you think out there, that really still books are selling. And there is a big market for secondhand. So yeah, I don't know who those people are. They must empty their libraries from their house and sell them all, and then they get put on. Someone's out there selling secondhand books for sure, and they show up on Amazon.
Janet?
This is really more of a request than a question, but with my topic, it could be nudged in a lot of different ways to go into different genres, because I'm early on this. So my request is, and I feel like I'm fairly widely read, but I don't really feel like I have a complete handle on what's selling and what's not. So I think it'd be really interesting for me is to get a feeling for what's selling and what's coming up in terms of the market. So when I'm in my process, I could nudge it to what really people are interested in reading.
Hmm. Well, I think, I'm not sure what genres that you're talking. Oh, sorry, I'm not sure what genres that you're talking about, but I recommend, go into your local bookstore and have a chat with the booksellers there and say what's selling. You can look on, the New York Times bestseller list, other bestseller lists, what books your friends are talking about. There are sort of ways to pick up that information.
I'll give you another
Yeah,
idea.
that's what
Your
I was going to say.
library.
And it
There's
depending.
on a couple of these instructional videos. I'm pimping for YouTube again. Um, there's one. My buddy Dale Roberts tells you how to get into Amazon. You can get into the Amazon site, and you probably actually know how to do all this. And you can go into a certain part of their management, and it'll tell you how many of these books are selling. It'll give you the lists of where these things stand. I mean, it's really scary about how much they're willing to let everybody know how things are going on Amazon. So um, I've not done it because it sounds like a lot of work, but you know.
We have a question.
I wondered, looking forward, currently and looking forward, how do you see AI influencing writing and editing onto the publishing? I've got college-age students and they are thick into it. So I just wondered what that horizon is.
Well, it's going to put me out of a job, no doubt. But I read a industry newsletter every day, and one company, I think it might be Wiley or something that's kind of more does practical nonfiction thing, is going to be sending all their authors guidelines for AI. Their position is it's going to happen. Authors are going to use AI, so we want them to use it in a responsible way where they're not stealing other people's work and plagiarizing, etc. So I don't know all the details, but I thought it was interesting because I think publishers have sort of been scrambled about it.
I
Amazon is currently has a couple of checks that you're supposed to answer about the extent that you have used AI in the book that you've given them.
Does AI have a future in the editing process, copy editing?
I haven't worked with it myself, so I don't really feel comfortable at answering, but I am sure that people are trying to develop those programs that will do that. Yes. I still think the human touch is going to be so much better, but realistically, I'm sure that's happening as we speak.
Yeah, if you think about how you two interacted and had conversations about, I can't imagine that kind of thing happening in AI. Things like typos and so on, we'd all probably be grateful if AI took that over.
And I'm sure it's pretty sophisticated of like structure and things like that. But
At
They
the
need to get
same
to a point.
time, when I was embarking on my current project, which is a biography of Major Robert Anderson, I decided to ask AI, is there a biography of Robert Anderson? Because I couldn't find any. And up popped, there are 5 biographies of Robert Anderson. The first book was one that he was in. Well, he's in every book about the Civil War because he was in charge of Fort Sumter when the Confederates fired on it and started the war. The second book was a book about Grant, in which he was also in because it was about the Civil War. And the other 3 books did not exist at all. Now, it's probably improved since then, but it's really scary to me. It actually gave ISBN numbers that didn't exist.
There are 2 or 3 commercial platforms, apps, or whatever they are, that some people are writing on. Grammarly is one.
Yeah.
Dibly Create is another. And they're a step up from working on. There's a moderate use of AI, I think, on them. They're a step up from Word, which I use. Word will not catch the fact that I say is when I meant to say it. Or Word will not catch. The only thing Word catches is typos and some grammatical problems. But you need it's very helpful if you could move up uh, to a step beyond Word. Now that's an interesting because you have to be really careful when you're doing it because Dibbly I've played with it. Dibbly create will write what you're writing off on the side as an alternative to what you've written, and that's pretty seductive. So and not your writing.
One more question over here.
My name is Rick Herman, and I am here on the island, and I agree with Nan that this is a wonderful place to write. It's very conducive for writing here on the island. I'm here on the island, and I write books on spirituality and finding beauty in all stages of life. I have one quick story that's a local success story that's about 2 weeks old. Does anybody know the lady behind the counter at Hudson's with the white hair, Kathy?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
You all know Kathy? Do you know her story?
Yes.
She has hit the big time. Does everybody know that? It's very inspiring, and I'll just tell you, just because it's such a wonderful story, she wrote a book on bullying for kids. And she has it sitting on, in front of her cash register, and I've talked to her over the years, saying, Kathy, how's your book? And she says, well, I sold 2 more copies last month. And she found an agent, finally, and that didn't work. It was not a good match. And then a year later, she found another agent that did work, and this agent happened to be at Sony, and the acquiring editor at Sony said, well, what have you got? And her agent said, well, I've got this unknown author that has published or that has written 3 books on bullying. And this person from Sony said, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And so she got signed up by Sony, and they're making it into a Netflix series for children to help them deal with bullying in school. So that's a local success story to inspire all of us.
Oh, see? Keep going, right? Can we have just time for one more question? And I have a question.
Yay. Yay, Bobby.
Okay. We touched on the topic of the library. I heard just a brief. Since we're here, and since it's where we all get our books and are exposed to books and immersed in books and every kind of book, how, as a writer, what role does the library play?
Well, I can certainly start because for both of my books, in my acknowledgments, you'll see Tony Vanover, and then in the first one, Mary Knight also, who have helped me get journal articles because I do so much research. I do nonfiction, and to write maybe a paragraph may take me to read 2 books and 3 journal articles, some of which may have been published in 1992 in a Kentucky Historical Magazine. They can get those for me, and I could not write without the work that they do.
And I want to add, I think this library is a very rich community of writers and readers. And I hope you do more things like this to bring us together to learn, either as writers or readers or budding published writers. So I hope we started the discussion here today, and we'll continue to have more sharing and learning from each other going forward.
Yes, thank you to our panel, and thank you to all of you for coming. I think it was well worth our time.